Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience in holding. We now have your speakers in conference. Please be aware that each of your lines is in a listen-only mode. You may ask questions at any time using the chat box. I would now like to turn the conference over to Chris Hund. You may begin.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. This is Chris Hund, Director for Clinical Quality at the Health Research and Educational Trust of the American Hospital Association. Thanks a lot for joining us for our monthly webinar for TeamSTEPPS. This one is brought to you by the North Shore-Long Island Jewish Health System, and it's called Tailoring Your TeamSTEPPS Program to Suit Your Audience. One size does not fit all. Just a few rules of engagement before we get going today. You could listen to audio two ways. You could listen via the phone, and if you do that, you're going to want to mute your computer speakers just because you'll get some feedback if you don't do that. If you don't want to listen through your phone, you can totally listen through your computer. We're going to have a question and answer session that's going to be held at the end of the presentation. And the way that we like to do the Q&A session is via written questions in the chat box that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. So throughout the course of the presentation, chat in any questions you might have. If they're of a logistical nature, we'll answer them right away. If they are of a content nature, something about what's happening in the presentation, we'll take that down and we'll try to put together a coherent interview-style question and answer period at the end where I'll ask the presenters the questions. This way, we get to make sure that the question seems sequential and topical, and also we get to make sure that everybody gets to get their question asked. If we have too many questions and we don't get to all of them, what we'll do is we'll have our presenters take a look at them afterwards, and we'll work on some responses, and we'll post them on the TeamSTEPPSportal.org webpage. Other than that, if we end up having no questions, then we'll turn it over to the possibility of audio questions, but that's actually never happened, and we've always had time enough and questions enough to do all of our chat questions. Just a couple upcoming TeamSTEPPS events, just to let you know about. We've got webinars scheduled through August of 2016. The topics and the speakers and registration information is posted on the TeamSTEPPS portal a few months in advance. So right now you can register for the December webinar, which is on integrating quality improvement methods to improve teamwork and patient safety. And that is going to be a great presentation put together by some individuals from UCLA. You can register for master training courses, our two-day master training courses, and that is courses through April 2016 are now open for you to register for. Also, you can register for our annual conference. That is going to be held June 8th through 10th in Washington, D.C., right there on Capitol Hill. It's a great location. It should be a great conference. Every year it grows, and we get more and more presenters and different topics and a lot of different workshops. So it's a lot of fun. I have to say all of these things are free. So it's a wonderful thing. All these things are free and brought to you by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. They are the funders of all of this. Also, if you can't travel, there is a free online course available. The way you register for that is by going over to this URL, which is on your screen right now. You can also go over to the AHRQ website. Just do a Google search for AHRQ TeamSTEPPS Online, and this will pop up, and you'll be able to register for this free online TeamSTEPPS course. To learn about all of this, you can head on over to the TeamSTEPPSportal.org. That is a really great resource for all the information that you'll need. Anytime you need help, please give us a call or shoot us an email at the number and the email address you see on the screen right now. We're here to answer questions about the program, registration, webinars, the national conference, anything you might have. We're here to answer content questions as well. If we can't answer them, we make sure to get you in touch with somebody who can. All right, so without further ado, I want to do a quick introduction for today's presenters. All three of them are from the North Shore-LIJ health system, and all three of them are part of an incredibly wonderful and dedicated team who has taken TeamSTEPPS and run with it in rich directions that I think are basically the wildest dreams of the people who originally created this program. They have done amazing work implementing across their system in many different clinical areas, in many different settings, and with all types of professionals. So you really are in for a treat today with your presenters. You'll be hearing first actually from Jayne O'Leary. She'll be who I'll be turning things over to. And then you'll be hearing from both Lynn and Denise as time goes on, and then all will be available to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I put you in the very capable hands of Jayne. Jayne?
Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate the introduction. So today our team is going to start off with the objectives for today. Today our team is going to start off with the polling questions for today.
We're really interested in finding out who all of you are, who's in the audience. So we'll be handing over to AHRQ now to do the polling up of our 3 questions.
Hi everyone, this is Jen with AHRQ. So you'll see here the first polling question is, how has your organization implemented TeamSTEPPS? So take a moment and select your answer right there. Jayne, are you comfortable moving on?
Sure, you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Jen.
Yep. All right, the next question. The care setting I work in is... Also, if your care setting is not listed there, feel free to chat that in via the discussion box on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, hopefully everyone was able to enter their care setting. And then we'll move on to one more polling question here. All right, so the last question that they would like to know is, what level of TeamSTEPPS training have you had? All right. Jayne, are you guys good to go now? All right.
Thanks for your help.
No problem.
So I'd like to start off with our objectives for the day. We'd like to describe the importance of knowing your training audience. We would like to discuss approaches for tailoring TeamSTEPPS training to your audience. We'd also like to present approaches for engaging your audience utilizing interdisciplinary faculty, And lastly, we want to discuss strategies for addressing training needs when limited trainee time is available. Next slide, thanks. So what we'd like to demonstrate today is we would like to show you how to teach TeamSTEPPS in your setting, whether it's in the classroom or with a larger audience. And based on the poll today, quickly, hopefully I'll get this correct, most of the care settings that were represented were over 64% in the acute care area, and the other larger number was academia was represented by over 15%. The level of training, I noticed that 50% of the audience today are master trainers, and approximately 30%, it looks like, have no training in TeamSTEPPS. So that's our intro to you. In our blueprint for how to teach your class, you really want to know by polling or whatever other methodology you use a little bit about your audience. It will really help you at this point. What I'd like to say to you also is that before you begin this journey, you want to discuss your goals with leadership prior to training. In this way, whether it's the C-suite or a service line, a department, or a unit that you're representing, you can in this way align your goals with organizations. Another technique you could use to know your audience is either a round-robin introduction, or in the TeamSTEPPS curriculum, we always do an icebreaker. With an icebreaker, gives us an opportunity to know our audience in the sense that their background, their purpose for coming, what their specialty is. In a round-robin technique, you could also do the same thing. It's a technique that you can use to generate and develop ideas in a group brainstorming setting. It relies on a process where you build off the contributions of all the participants, and it works pretty well. This methodology also helps you get an idea about the background of the participants, the level of expertise, their knowledge of TeamSTEPPS, and why they're really attending the training. Sometimes the biggest issue with knowing your audience is a lot of people show up to the class and they're really unsure as to why they're here. Another technique that we'd like to tell you about is in-person dialogue. What we find does happen, I think, with any audience and any curriculum that you're training people is that you might have to change your style, you might have to change your techniques depending on how the audience responds to the questions. Sometimes we like to say that we change on the fly in the moment to adapt to the audience and what their needs are. And this way, sometimes the strategies or techniques might work for one audience but not the other. So in knowing your audience, why are you here? As I previously stated, sometimes people come to the TeamSTEPPS training not fully knowing why they're there or what their role is going to be back in their organization. Some questions we like to ask them is, what is their commitment to patient safety? Have they attended formal or informal training? Have they done any online training? Are they master trainers already? And it's good to know, has leadership defined their role in TeamSTEPPS, or are they walking into this training unsure of how they'll fit into the organizational goals and role? What message or goals do you want to take away from today's training? Sometimes people come in and their role or their concern to today's training is not as clear. So we as trainers want to know, what can we help you do today? Do you need references? Do you need curriculum? Do you need coaching? We are here as trainers to try to help them and guide them with that. And I think another important message or goal for your classes are, what are your goals for training? For example, with implementation, will you start in a pilot unit, or is your goal to train throughout the system? And our mentor, Lily Thomas, always says to us, begin with the end in mind. Next, we'd like to talk to you regarding knowing your audience. Who are you? What we found in the poll from today is we have a diverse group of people who are listening to this webinar, and we find in our classrooms is the same. Backgrounds are different. Educational levels are different. It's the interprofessional team. It's not all RNs or doctors. It's the whole team attending. Your care settings, as we saw, are different. And what we want to share with you today is you can tailor the materials, as we have found in our travels, for acute care, long-term care, anywhere from the ED, med-surg, home care, ambulatory services. If you're clear on your role, so is your role coming to the two-day master training to be a trainer, or as we like to say, would like you to be a trainer and a coach? Are you part of the executive sponsor team? How do you fit into the organization? And I'd like to say, too, make sure you have a shared mental model that you can align all organizational needs with your training. With that being said, I'm going to turn over the program to Lynn Fricke.
Hi, everybody. This is Lynn Fricke, Madeline Fricke. Because we use the technique of trying to get to know all of you by doing the polling, as Jayne O'Leary said, we've learned something about the audience. So I'm going to try to adjust what I present to you to meet the needs of everybody who's listening in. Clearly, a number of you, as Jayne pointed out, are master trainers, but there are also people here who haven't had training. So I'm going to go on the assumption that you're perhaps considering going forward with attending master training, bringing this to your organization. So with that in mind, when you look at tailoring training to your audience, the first statement there is decide which TeamSTEPPS program to use. So I'm going to take a moment to explain the three TeamSTEPPS programs a little bit more than I had expected to, because I think there are people listening who may want to understand the differences. We offer in the curriculum, or AHRQ has developed a curriculum that talks about master training. Master training is a two-day, very rich curriculum. On the first day, you actually learn the TeamSTEPPS tools and strategies, and on the second day, you understand how to move an audience, an organization, perhaps your facility, perhaps in a classroom, in an academic setting, how to make them understand that we're bringing change and that we need to develop implementation and that we need to coach people. So master training is something that is lengthy, and you want people who are committed attending that class. So when you're thinking of who you're teaching, you want to think about the people coming to master training who are going to really buy into this and support this and perhaps teach it. Master training here at the North Shore-LIJ health system is also viewed as an opportunity to create coaches. You heard Jayne mention coaching. What we do is we bring our frontline leaders into master training, that two-day in-depth program, in order to help them coach this at the front line. Now, those of you in the audience that are using TeamSTEPPS and have brought this to your organization probably understand one of the big challenges is to keep this going through sustainment. And this is a technique we've used to help us sustain. We use master training to teach trainers, but we also identify an audience of master trainers as coaches so that they have the level of knowledge to support all the use of TeamSTEPPS at the front line on a day-to-day experience. The second opportunity is to teach a class called Fundamentals, and generally Fundamentals is delivered in 4 hours. It's actually the curriculum of day one of master training, but it's scaled down. Fundamentals, we have found, is a great program when you begin to implement and you want to bring this across a large number of your staff. It's a 4-hour program. It's comprehensive. It's, we find it's very good to use in an interprofessional, interdisciplinary fashion. The third option is Essentials. Essentials is usually delivered in a shorter period of time. It doesn't involve a number of videos, and so it allows for kind of a quick review of the TeamSTEPPS tools and strategies or introductions. And it is kind of a time-limited program. So the question is, when you're deciding what program to use, what should you be thinking about? Well, clearly, master training are for the people who are going to go forward and teach TeamSTEPPS and coach it. You need to think about, if you're choosing between fundamentals and essentials, you have to be realistic. What timing do you have? Who am I bringing into the classroom? Is this a class that I'm introducing to an audience for the very first time? If that's the case, fundamentals might be a good choice. Is this something I'm doing as a review? If you're reviewing, you might think about doing essentials. Sometimes you have participants who really cannot give the time for a whole program. I'm going to give you an example. There are times you have staff, and I'll use physicians as an example, that may not even be part of your staff but work in the system or work in your hospital or work in your healthcare setting, and you want them to understand and appreciate TeamSTEPPS, but the reality is they are not able to give you 2 full days or 4 hours, and essentials can meet the needs there. So looking and thinking before you decide which program will really help you bring a more effective program. Another question to ask yourself is, if you're bringing classroom learning to people and you're going to use master training, fundamentals, or essentials, if you know who your audience is, if you know who you want to train, you should be thinking about, who do I want to deliver the message? Who should be speaking? Who should be presenting the modules? Now, the reality, again, is you may not have a lot of options, but if you do, we're suggesting think about who will be in the classroom, because there is something incredibly powerful about people in a profession hearing someone speak and speak well of TeamSTEPPS that's in the same profession that they are. Let me give you an example. If you are a physician, there is a lot of power in hearing another physician not only teach but give examples of how they've used TeamSTEPPS or how TeamSTEPPS perhaps help them provide safety to their patients. If you have a room of executives that you're presenting to, particularly if this is something new and you want buy-in from the executives, you may want to think about people who are able to speak to moving metrics, being able to demonstrate the financial implications of improving your healthcare delivery by bringing a program like TeamSTEPPS in. Then you might have an audience that's interprofessional or interdisciplinary, and you might have sitting in that audience, and we do this a lot at the North Shore-LIJ health system, because after all, TeamSTEPPS is about the whole team. But if we have in the audience perhaps clinical people, nursing, physicians, maybe physical therapy, allied services, environmental. Recently, we've taught people who are coming from our technology department, the people responsible for making sure that we have electronic medical records. You really want to see, do we have people, have we created master trainers who can come in to demonstrate, to actually model that the team works together in presenting, and people from each service line or each area are using and speaking and teaching TeamSTEPPS to them. So take time when you're planning your programs to look at who you can bring into that classroom that will give validity because they are in that profession or that service line. Can we go to the next slide? Now, anyone who's ever taught TeamSTEPPS knows that there are always challenges we face. And I'm going to go back to Jayne's presentation and say, when you take the time, hopefully prior to your classroom and then when people are walking in, perhaps polling up, perhaps round robin, to get to know your audience, you will probably have a sense of the challenges you're going to face right then and there. It's not hard to pick up when an audience is engaged, gregarious, raising their hand, speaking, sharing stories. And you also may know you have an audience sitting in front of you who are perhaps there and not sure why they're there. Maybe they're there and they seem distracted. And it's good to have a sense before you walk in because, as Jayne said, sometimes we modify our program. So one of the challenges, depending on your audience, can be timing. And there's a couple of things I want to say about timing. One thing that helps you with timing is rehearsal and practice so that you know your material very well. Because if you know your material well and you have an audience that is engaged and asks a lot of questions, you always have a sense in your mind of what you have to get through, and you can channel those questions in a way that you can still get through your modules in a timely fashion because you don't want to get to the end of the program and give less time to the last modules than you intended. You also know that you may have an audience that is not fully engaged and you're going to have more time, and it's always good to have a repertoire of things to bring to the table. The richness of the curriculum of TeamSTEPPS provides you lots of videos, it provides you lots of exercises, and it's good to have all that in your back pocket, so to speak, so that when you walk in, as you get to assess your audience, you know how to time things. It's also good if you're co-teaching to have someone actually cue you on time and have some little way of, we do a flagging of time. We use a method that we hold up a color so that people know how much time they have left. Another challenge is something I mentioned, a disengaged audience. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why are they not engaged? Why are they sitting there? Now, if you've gotten some sense of the audience by asking questions up front, you may already know. But one of the things that we've learned to do is if we find that the audience isn't openly answering questions, asking questions, we try to turn things around and bring them the perspective of what's in it for them. How do you get people to talk about what's in it for them? You ask them some questions. Sometimes an audience will be very comfortable speaking publicly about concerns they may have about patient safety. In other circumstances, we find we put people into a safety zone by breaking them into groups and giving them a couple of questions. And the questions can actually generate for them some thinking processes that you can then elicit from them why they may be there. So let me give you an example. In TeamSTEPPS, we have a module on communication. If you find you need to engage the audience more, you might introduce the module and put them into groups and say to your audience, we want you to take 5 to 10 minutes and work in a group of 5 or 6, perhaps a group that work together, and tell us, write down, have somebody scribe what you would change today in your workplace, if you could, in communication. Give them time to start talking. Give them time to get in a comfort zone in a small group, and then bring that group back together. And what we generally do is one of us goes up with a whiteboard, and we ask for a little report out from groups, and we write down the responses. So that when you begin to introduce your curriculum, when you go through your slides, instead of you as the presenter telling them, this is a good thing to do, you should use the S4, you should use this, you can bring it back to, you all told us, you all said that people aren't giving us information we need. We have a solution for that called TeamSTEPPS. So instead of bringing it to them, you're actually answering their questions or meeting their needs. I'll give you another example, something that's worked for us. We have a module called Leading Teams, and we break into this by identifying who are leaders and what's a leader. Something we do is we break people into groups. We have the groups do something like write a job description for a leader you want to follow. Write out qualities and characteristics. And again, get them thinking so that all of a sudden, even if they don't know why they were there, as they're reporting out things that they're looking for, you're going to, again, show how TeamSTEPPS can get them there. And now they understand why they're there. If you are in a situation where you're with a couple of presenters and you find that the strategies you're using need to be changed up in real time, when you take a break, use a TeamSTEPPS tool called a huddle. Huddle with your teammates, huddle with your faculty. The value of that is when you come together, you may come up with some strategies together in the moment that you think will be working for you because your teammates are going to give you that information, some observations they've made. And here's one other suggestion. As you go forward in teaching, when you're teaching master training, when you're teaching essentials, if you're teaching fundamentals, at the end of your class, practice what you preach. Debrief your audience. It's a great way for you to learn. Ask the audience, what do you think we did well? If we taught this class to you again, what might help you? What would you do differently? That very thing has led our team to understand that when we move forward, we have to have lots of examples and lots of scenarios. We've had environmental workers say, this is great, but you didn't give us any examples that meant anything to us. We've had people in other service lines say, gee, I'm trying to think of how to apply them. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Denise Mazzapica, who's going to share some of those scenarios and how we address it with you.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Chris said to you, at the North Shore-LIJ Health System, we have really taken TeamSTEPPS training and implementation everywhere in our health system. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be able to answer the question, how do you tailor the program to suit the audience? Because as you can imagine, in a health system of this size, we have 21 hospitals, we have long-term care, we have home care, EMS services, specialty hospitals. You're going to have to tailor it to the individual members of the audience. So as Lynn spoke to you about challenges, one of your biggest challenges as a TeamSTEPPS trainer is going to be, how do I make this relevant to all members of the audience? And very often, if you see that your audience is not engaged, it could be because they don't see how this is all going to relate to them. Based on the polling up questions that we just did at the beginning of this presentation, I see that most of you are from the acute care setting and some of you are from academia. So based on that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what you need to have in your repertoire. You definitely have to have what we call, the trainer toolkit. And a big part of that trainer toolkit is being able to take the TeamSTEPPS tools and strategies and relate them in scenarios that are relevant to the audience. And in a clinical environment, for people who are clinical, that's not too difficult because luckily the TeamSTEPPS content is rich with scenarios and videos and exercises that focus on giving care and using TeamSTEPPS and communicating in clinical environment. However, there are parts of the clinical environment that may not necessarily feel that they are seeing exactly what they need to see in order to be able to take this and move it forward. For instance, the environmental services department or the security department very often will say, well, this is great, but how do we use it? So as trainers, you have to do a little bit of investigating and a little bit of research so that you can create scenarios and make it relevant to them. And one of the things that you need to do is to find out how exactly does this team work? Who's on the teams, the different teams that are represented in your audience? How do they work together? How do they communicate with each other? And if we were teaching a class filled with people from academia, that would be one of the first things we would do, is to put them into groups, put everyone into groups and discuss. Tell us about your workflow. Tell us, are you all in the same building? Are you often even in the same room? Or are you spread out across the campus? Because all of that is going to have an impact on how you teach somebody how to do a brief. How do you explain to them how they can huddle and debrief when they're not even in the same building? One of the things we've done in our health system, we've trained people who are in totally non-clinical environments, such as medical records. We've done the phone operators from our different sites. We've done the IT department. And very often we start out by showing them and telling them stories about how, even though they may not consider themselves clinical, the job that they do does have an impact at some point along the way on the patient and on the caregivers who are taking care of the patient. So it's very important to be able to provide scenarios and exercises that will impact every single one of the groups that you see up on this slide: clinical, non-clinical, interdisciplinary, behavioral. We have 2 behavioral health specialty hospitals, and one of the first things we had to do when we were taking TeamSTEPPS to the behavioral audience was sit down with some of the key players in that group and look at how are we going to make this real to them. How can we take scenarios? Let's take some real-life scenarios that have happened in the behavioral health environment that they know about and can relate to, and then let's plug TeamSTEPPS into that scenario and see how the outcome could have changed if they had used TeamSTEPPS. The faculty has to be able to think outside the box when it comes to being in a classroom setting with a variety of people with lots of different backgrounds on how are they going to get the message across. You have to know that, for instance, if you're doing the communication module, SBAR is not just for communication between a physician and a nurse, but it can be used in communication between 2 environmental service workers. It can be used in communication in the engineering or security department. It can be used in academia, all right, for one professor to speak to another professor about a situation in a classroom or with a student. The same is true of all of the other strategies: task assistance, feedback, advocacy and assertion. You have to spend the time up front. I believe Jayne said it, begin with the end in mind, knowing your audience to say, all right, how am I going to take each of these individual modules and make them come alive for the people that are in the audience? And very often what we will do is we get them involved in the process, because the reality is, if you're not from the behavioral health environment, you're not going to know what a real-life scenario is to them. If you don't work on an ambulance in emergency services, you're not going to know that the people that you're going to brief with may be the person who's driving with you and then the family when you walk inside the house. So knowing your audience and tailoring everything that you do to who is going to be in that audience is extremely important. Another thing that we need to look at, yes, please change the slide, are strategies. Now, one of the biggest questions we hear all the time is, okay, well, this is great, but what happens when I don't have 4 hours? Or what happens when I can't get a group of people for 2 days? Or I can't ask volunteer docs who don't actually even work for the organization to give up a day in the office. Well, there are lots of things you can do, and actually that is the beauty of TeamSTEPPS. Now, as you see on the slide, there are videos, there are stories, there's data. All of this is included in the TeamSTEPPS curriculum, and they add a richness to the very basic essential elements in the curriculum. Personally, we recommend that you use them as much as you can, no matter how short your training period is. And the other thing I have to say is that we do not recommend that you train for less than 2 hours unless you're going to do multiple trainings. For instance, as Lynn mentioned before, we very often, when we had our volunteer physicians who don't actually work for our organization,
we were challenged to say, how are we going to give them what we consider is essential for them to know when we really can't bring them and ask them to close their office for 4 hours, or sometimes even for 2 hours. So what we did was, we looked for something that they were already doing. So in our organization, we bring our volunteer physicians together, in some places on a weekly basis, in some places on a monthly basis, for grand rounds. So one of the things we did was meet with the leadership of the department, whether it was cardiology, anesthesia, OBGYN, and surgery, and sit with them and say, all right, you're going to have 4 grand rounds over the course of the next 4 months, and and they're 1 hour each. We would take 4 of them, 4 months in a row, break up the TeamSTEPPS fundamental module, train a piece of it at each one, so that at the end, they were coming into a meeting that they already planned for, they were getting the information we needed them to get, and it was the understanding that they would have to attend all 4 of the meetings, which they did anyway, because it was something that was part of their schedules on a regular basis. So you have to really think about what is it that you're trying to do with the training. If you just want to say, okay, we're going to bring a group of executives together, and we really just basically want them to know what TeamSTEPPS is about so they know what staff is being trained with, you can do that very easily in 2 hours by eliminating all of what we call the extras. And even though the extras add a richness to the curriculum, they're not absolutely vital. So you don't necessarily have to show the videos. You don't have to do all the exercises. And as much as I hate to say this, because here at North Shore, we are big believers in stories, but you don't have to tell all the stories. Very often when we have a limited time, the one thing we absolutely will show is the Sue Sheridan video, because we feel that no matter what the circumstances are, that brings home to everyone in the room why we're here, why we're focusing on safety, and why it's so important for us to be able to communicate with each other. And as I said, you can focus on just critical points in each of the modules, cover all the content, but you'll still stay pure to the curriculum, which is something that you should know was a decision that we made at the very beginning, that we were not going to change the pure content of the curriculum, that we would cut back on what we call the extras if we needed to, but the curriculum had to remain the same no matter who the audience was. And that's the end of our presentation for you today. We hope that we gave you what you need, or as we like to call it, the basics for doing a TeamSTEPPS training in a classroom setting.
Thank you very much, Denise and Lynn and Jayne. Great presentation. Everyone, remember that if you'd like, you could chat in some questions in that chat box on the right, but we have a few to start with that came in during the presentation. A very active chat box while you were talking, and lots of people discussing things over there. One of the questions that came in very early on was whether or not you find icebreakers or any sort of team activity, like the paper chain activity, for example, to work with physicians. Are those activities successful with them?
I think, Chris, I'd like to say yes, because I think that, one, it sets up that sense of competitiveness that I think teams who really work well together have. It also, I think, engages the physician and the whole team, and I think for us as the trainers, it gives us a good sense of you know, how this team fits together, how they work together, and do they work well, or is it just one person who's leading the group? So I agree wholeheartedly. It's a good exercise to use.
And also, it actually helps to flatten the hierarchy right from the get-go, because there's no titles involved with making those chains or doing the icebreaker. Everybody is the same, and everybody's working towards the same goal.
Jayne, you always tell a story about one group that made a chain and added to the chain.
We had a very large group from a tertiary hospital who, you know, were very renowned, shall we say, for their expertise. And they were not successful in making a long chain. And I believe that when the other teams demonstrated the length and the quality of their chains, it set up a trigger reaction in them that they could do better. So throughout the day, they added a link every time we had a module, and to the end that at the end of the day, they had the longest chain. So they didn't get the full, idea about teamwork, but they did demonstrate that they could do it.
Definitely, I've noticed a lot of competitiveness, as you brought up, with people in that activity, and cheating. Definitely have seen some cheating too in my time.
Yeah, it's always cheating. In fact, last year at the TeamSTEPPS National Conference, your keynote speaker presented on Do It Well and Make It Fun. And I guess something that we all believe, and anybody who's ever been with us knows that we like to have fun. And that kind of engages your audience is when you can have some humor. And when you do that exercise, it usually does bring laughter to the table because we have a lot of fun with it. People, we were doing this at one of our behavioral sites, and I remember they said, well, we created wrist restraints instead of a chain, but we're behavioral, and they were kind of, because they only had 2 links in their chain, but they were, engaged in it in a way that it brought humor to the table, that everybody appreciated. And that's always a great way. We actually do it with the second module. Some people do it in the beginning. But it's a great way to have people loosen up and have a little fun with it, including physicians, because I think that was the question.
Yes. And one thing I've also noticed with that, and then we'll move on, but I don't know if you do it or if others do it, sometimes people give out different supplies for different teams doing the paper chain, so that not everybody has the equal supply, so there could be then discussions around resource allocation and having to deal with things like that. So
we don't do that. We make feel it. Mm-hmm. We sometimes see that we can't even out the number of people in the team, and that comes to the table. We've seen that where, and it's kind of interesting because I think it's not uncommon for us to see that a smaller group sometimes produces a larger chain. And we weave that through when we do the modules. We reference that sometimes, that it's really about how the team works together, and that sometimes even in limited resources, an efficient team can work very well together to produce the outcome you're looking for.
Changing direction a little bit, an individual asked, said that they were having difficulty in getting staff to understand the use of cuss. People were feeling that this is something that could threaten their job. It sounds like an issue, obviously, a cultural issue in the hospital. So how do you teach cuss, and how do you then make it work in these settings so that people feel comfortable using cuss?
Well, I think there's a lot that's a big answer. If you're teaching this in an organization, we got to go back to Cotters Model, and you need buy-in from the leadership. So I guess to the person who put that question on the table, that would be the first thing I'd be looking at. That was there a buy-in to begin with, and was there a true understanding? That would be the first thing I would look at. And I think, and I'm sure my colleagues will add to this, is that one of the things we do talk about when you teach cuss is the appropriate use of cuss. And it is to make people understand that there's a concern for safety. We don't use it to challenge someone in a way that would embarrass them. We're careful how we use it, and it's the judicious use of cuss that we would encourage. Another thing is overuse of any TeamSTEPPS tools will discredit the validity of it. it's really something that when someone hears, I'm concerned, I'm uncomfortable, this is a safety issue, or, certainly in the presence of a patient, I'm seeking clarity, that person recognizes that is, this is a very serious thing that I need comfort with. I'm asking you to stop the line here because I'm uncomfortable. And I think there's a lot that goes into the actual tone of our voice, how we say things, so that it's perceived as something that you are seeking clarity, that you're not saying you're wrong and I'm right, but that I'm uncomfortable with this. That's the emphasis.
I'd also like to add to what Lynn said, that first of all, if anyone is feeling that their job might be threatened by using these tools, then you've got to step way back and say, well, how did TeamSTEPPS come to this organization? Does the leadership truly believe in TeamSTEPPS? And have they made it very clear to everyone in the organization that TeamSTEPPS is there to be a communication tool for teams to be able to give feedback and express concerns to each other? It's not about, even though we call it the true challenge rule, it's not really about challenging, and that if someone uses it, they're going to be supported. They're not going to be chastised. If that's the environment in which you're trying to roll out TeamSTEPPS, I'm going to be very honest and tell you it's never going to work. The other thing is, one of the things we emphasize a great deal in training is we're not just training the speakers, we're training the listeners. So when we do training, we want to make sure that whoever is a decision maker, whoever is going to be in the role of decision maker, knows that when they hear the cuss, it's not a challenge to their authority, it's not a challenge to what they know. It's saying, I have a concern, you need to stop and address it. So I think if you have those two pieces in place, the backing of the leadership and the training of the listener, focusing on the listener as well as the speaker, that should help with rolling out CUS or any of the other tools.
Chris, I just wanted to say, too, in that particular module, it starts off with, before you get into the conflict resolution, advocacy and assertion for the patient. And I think if people maybe read into that a little bit more and think about the whole premise of giving you these conflict resolution skills is that, unfortunately, errors and accidents and adverse events are still happening with patients and in hospitals. And if we truly, have that executive leadership and we want to create that culture of safety, then these are some of the techniques or methodologies that they can use to do that. But, Denise and Lynn are right. If you don't have that support of executive leadership, an example of that is yesterday Denise and I trained a group of new executives to the C-suite, and I could tell that they have the buy-in and they support the team being able to utilize these skills, and they're going to be able to walk that talk. So I think if they demonstrate that, then these type of skills will be easier to implement.
I want to just revisit something that I mentioned in the presentation about your faculty, and it's not just perhaps the formal faculty, but sometimes there are people in the audience that can support something very strongly by speaking. And I'm thinking of a situation where we were teaching, and there was a physician, and he had someone use CUS. And in the case, it was in a procedural area. And what happened in this procedure is there was a concern about a certain medication that was about to be given by a nurse. And when the nurse went to give it, she used that strategy in TeamSTEPPS, and he was able to explain to her why her concerns, he allayed the fear she had because the patient's history did not warrant the level of concern. But in this class, this physician got up and told the story and said he was so glad that this nurse did it for two reasons. First, I should say, because when she said she was concerned and uncomfortable, he recognized that she had his back, that she was looking out for the patient and she was looking out for him. And he always wanted that to happen. And he said, and the second benefit was it gave him an opportunity to say, this is a really good question. I'm glad this was brought as a concern, and let me teach the team here why this is a safe way to administer this medication. When you've had that kind of situation, that becomes your story to pass on. That might become someone you want to pull into your faculty. So I think, the question on the table, of course, is, concerns about use of cuffs, and how do we teach it? We teach it by trying to make people appreciate the value of it, by making sure people understand that, as Denise said, when you use a cuff, the organization is going to have to support it, and by also bringing forward examples of where caregivers were very happy that someone used that strategy because it helped the patient and it helped them. It's a win-win.
Thank you. Yeah, I think with cuts, everyone, people forget that it's in the mutual support portion, right? So it is about that support. So last kind of question. A few people asked for, different scenarios or different ideas or videos for specific clinical areas or for specific situations, be it pediatrics or in education, in med students and nursing students working together. And my question for you kind of globally is, what do you do when you approach a new unit or a new situation and you as faculty may not have experience in that area? How do you go about and develop new ideas for teaching or new tools for an area that you may not have the clinical background in or that you just have not worked with before?
Okay, I'll start off with that question because I just did it not that long ago. We do not hesitate to reach out to the experts in the area, okay? I recently was asked to come in and using TeamSTEPPS to do some team building in a cardiothoracic intensive care unit setting in one of our sites. And I have had no experience in the cardiothoracic ICU setting in over 30-something years. So what I did was immediately reach out, and luckily for me, it happened to be I was able to reach out to my colleague Lynn Fricke here, who had just come from that environment, because she has recent experience in that environment. When we had to do something that was revolving around the OR, I reached out to colleagues that I know who are experts in the peri-op area. We've done that basically across the board, everywhere we've gone and everywhere we've taken TeamSTEPPS. By no means do we claim as a team to have experience in every area that we need to have it. So what we do is reach out to those experts.
If I can just add, because we're such a large system, I think some of the best work in TeamSTEPPS began at one of our large behavioral facilities, and then we brought on a second behavioral, and we also have behavioral units in a number of our other hospitals. But this large behavioral facility, and Denise works with them. We work with different sites. By reaching out to them to make it meaningful, they developed examples and scenarios that we could present to their staff that meant something to them, because it's a world that we aren't familiar with. And there are even words. We were talking with some of the behavioral people recently. There are words that are common words in a behavioral setting that we like to thread through, and we would not even appreciate what they do and their environment and the concerns they have for patient safety particularly because that team comes from more of an acute care setting, are quite different than the kinds of things that we were used to teaching. So, you know, they did a spectacular job, I think, and I think we'd all agree, in bringing forward examples for us to use and making, not just examples, but making us walk in their shoes, because they don't have the same relationships, and there's a need for viewing things with boundaries, and they may not have the presence of the physicians that you do in an acute care setting. So it's so worth reaching out and spending time with people to make the program better for them.
I was going to say, Chris, too, for us, I guess because we are a large health system, at first I think we were challenged by going into a setting we were unfamiliar with. For example, we have our own EMS corps, and it's pretty large, and we had no knowledge of EMS per se, but I think because the team works dynamically and is not afraid to ask questions, we went out and did basically, I guess, the equivalent of a needs assessment. You know, tell us about yourself, what do you need, and then because the curriculum is set up the way it is, we were able to take a brief and adapt it for EMS. We were able to take a handoff and adapt it for EMS. And I think the lesson learned for us is that pretty much after that, we were able to adapt all the tools and strategies for home care. We were able to show the home care people how the multi-team system was adapted to meet their needs. Our next challenge is working with a very large group from IT. We're training over 3,000 people, and we were, or I should speak for myself, I was somewhat apprehensive about it, but we've done so much work in the electronic medical record that I think the fact that these tools and strategies they're going to see can be adapted in any setting, and particularly for people who are dealing with such a complex system and the need to meet all the meaningful use criteria. So,
and I'd just like to add one last thing with that. No matter what setting you're going to take this in, no matter where you're going to teach it, it is extremely important to take the time at the beginning to plan. And as part of your plan, it should be reaching out to the experts, the people you know who work in those areas, know the workflow, know how the team works together, and actually asking them to sit down and give you some real-life scenarios that you can put TeamSTEPPS into and show what a difference it would have made in that scenario. So reach out to the experts and plan. You know, I'm thinking about last year we came and we talked a lot about diversity, and diversity is not just ethnicity. And for a system like ours, we have multiple sites. They each have their own culture. So when you're looking at your training, it is service line, it is, you know, what role people play, but it's also times the culture of the place that you're going to train. It's understanding a little bit about the world they work in and the people there, and looking at the dynamics, understanding the differences in one group to another. That's why I think it was actually Jayne who coined the phrase, one size does not fit all. And even though we are very true here at North Shore-LIJ Health System to the curriculum, we stay very true, we do appreciate that even within our own structure as we train, we have to always look at the differences in where we're going and how we're going to present to those people.
Chris, just one last shout out to all of you at AHRQ and AHRQ. I think since we've been involved over the last 7 or 8 years, the modules on long-term, the modules on primary care, the videos there, I'm not afraid to take them, cut them, and paste them into, say, an acute care setting. I think they can be customized. I think the fact that the limited English proficiency, and I'm also thinking of, there's one more, rapid response team, all your videos have really helped us segue into different clinical and interdisciplinary areas. So I advise everyone to take a look at them too. They're very helpful.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that plug at the end for all of the different settings of care that there are materials available on the AHRQ website. Well, I think we're a little bit over time, but that was a great discussion. Thank you for answering those questions. And I think without any ado, we're going to close up shop here. So thank you very much, Jayne and Lynn and Denise.
Thank you.
So.